Well, President Obama has called it one of the most defining partnerships of the 21st century, but natural allies India and the United States of America haven't maximized their partnership just yet. Can Prime Minister Narendra Modi push for a rebalance, or will controversial issues constrain the dialogue? Can India and the US forge deeper trade and investment ties and find ways to address deep-rooted concerns on both sides? To find answers to some of those questions, joining us on this special today, Meera, Shankar, former ambassador of India to the US, Subir, Gokarn, director for research at Brookings, India, WPS Sidhu, senior fellow foreign policy at the Brookings India Center and Brookings Institution. Appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Meera, Shankar, let me start by asking, let me quote what Stephen Cohen says. He said, "What does natural allies mean in an operational sense?" And I think that really addresses the heart of the matter. You know, this is season for grand announcements, 100 billion, which eventually becomes 20 billion, 35 billion, and so on and so forth. But in the context of Prime Minister Modi's visit to the US, meeting President Obama, who's pretty much at the end of his term, how much of this is going to be substantive? How much of this will be in the realm of atmospherics?
Well, I think there's an opportunity to give a more substantive shape to the strategic partnership. Firstly, I think Prime Minister Modi, in accepting the invitation, has signaled that he's not going to let past grievances become the dominant theme of the relationship. And if you look at India and the United States, there are so many reasons why they should seek good relations. For India, if we look at it, the US is not only our single largest trading partner in goods and services, around $100 billion, but more important, and this is a fact which normally doesn't get played up, it is the partnership with the US which has helped the growth of sunrise sectors in the Indian economy, such as IT, software, biotechnology, and helped to propel India onto a higher growth path. Because the US is the largest single destination for our exports of goods and services. We are not really good at exports. Most countries, we have a balance of trade deficit. With the US, we actually have a small balance of trade surplus, and services trade is broadly balanced from both sides. So that is very important. Secondly, the US continues to be at the frontier of technological research and innovation. So it will be India's most valued partner for cutting-edge technologies and for financial partnerships. Thirdly, I would say that there is a broad convergence between the two countries in Asia. If you look at Asia, it's now become the fulcrum of the global economy. Yet you have so many unresolved tensions and disputes. We just had the visit of the Chinese president to India. Now, both India and the US seek good relations with China, yet at the same time, they would like to craft a stable and sustainable Asian balance, which would better ensure that China's rise is peaceful and would contribute to peace and prosperity in the region. Then you look at our immediate neighborhood, Pakistan and Afghanistan. I mean, I think it's imperative for India and the US to have very candid and close consultations on Afghanistan, because we don't want a vacuum in the region, which will be a cause of great instability.
I'll get to the regional stability aspect of it in just a bit, but let me take the investment and trade argument forward. Let me get you to comment on that, Subir Gokarn. Is it going to be easy for India and the US to look beyond the disappointments? And let's just look at the current context. The disappointments clearly on the US side, the fact that this government has refused to open up multi-brand retail. They haven't revoked the policy just yet, but they've said, we're not going to entertain a multi-brand retail application in this country. Insurance, still not done. The Prime Minister is going to be making a big pitch for Make in India once again a day before he heads to the US, in a sense signaling to the US that India is open for business. But will the disappointments overshadow the potential of maximizing this partnership?
I think we have to approach this with a sort of pragmatic set of expectations on what this summit is going to achieve from an economic viewpoint. And as you've highlighted, there are many sectors in which the US has a comparative advantage, some of which Ambassador Shankar also mentioned, high tech, for example. which will gain from investment in India. So there is a mutual interest in those sectors. And there are some sectors which India needs to approach from a global perspective.
Yeah.
For example, manufacturing is not something that the US has great strength in, but India wants to become a manufacturing powerhouse. That's the whole Make in India. So, but opening up or doing domestic reform, improving the investment climate domestically, will actually benefit from the viewpoint of inward investment.
Yeah.
Countries, including the US. On the specific issues of multi-brand retail and insurance and some other financial services, and also sectors relating to IPR, which has been a bone of contention. I think there somewhat more bilateral focus may be necessary.
But do you believe that we are going to be able to move ahead as far as the IPR-related issues are concerned? Because, you know, we're one of the countries on the IPR watch list for the U.S. Trade Department, and the U.S. continues to maintain that India is not doing enough.
I think the report, the USTR's, the U.S. Trade Representative report on intellectual property rights, where India is put on the priority watch list, also does recognize that India is making progress in certain areas on the IPR agenda. And when I read it, and I've sort of just commented on it in the report that we just put out today, there are certain areas like piracy, for example, where there is, I believe, a complete confluence of interest. So given that confluence exists, it makes sense to try and push ahead to something that is mutually acceptable. There are other areas which have to do with the pharma sector, particularly compulsory licensing, which is something that has created friction, where I think some middle ground may be possible to find. I've used the eminent domain argument to argue for this middle ground, and I think that's something to explore. Now, there are no answers here. There's no sense of certainty, but we need some sort of a conceptual framework within which this conversation takes place, and I think we need to try and explore those as much as possible.
Yes, Ms. Shankar.
You know, on the IPR issue, because you've raised it, I think, first of all, India is WTO compliant.
Right.
All our IPR laws are WTO compliant. And as Subir mentioned, in areas where there is some degree of, divergence, I think it's possible to have pragmatic solutions. If you look at the copyright industry, where there used to be book piracy, now many of the publishing firms have started printing Indian editions which come out, and they are much cheaper priced for the Indian market only, and they come out almost simultaneously with their international editions. But when we're talking about
big pharma, do you really believe...
You could well look at the agreement between Cipla and Gilead, where Cipla has has an agreement to produce, and Gilead has licensed Cipla to produce cheaper versions
Which also means that big pharma needs to act more pragmatic.
Well, they need to be pragmatic, but there are ways to handle these issues pragmatically without getting locked into, positions.
Understandable. But, since you talked about the WTO, and let me ask you this, Mr. Sandhu, in the context of what's just happened at the WTO, India blocking the trade facilitation pact, do you believe that that is going to overshadow talks? Because it certainly did in July when John Kerry was here in India, and he, in no uncertain terms, made the US's displeasure known.
Well, more than John Kerry, it was really Penny Pritzker, the Commerce Secretary, who used that approach. But I think there is a certain degree of pragmatism in the U.S., given that this, for the U.S., is probably the one big success story, foreign policy success story. So I think there's going to be an effort to not make sure that the WTO disagreement does not overshadow some of the other, positive prospects going forward. And I can see that there's a spate of areas where there may be cooperation possible, and that's going to be explored. Clean energy is one. This is something that John Kerry made a big pitch for. There seem to be few sort of WTO-related issues to that. So I think there will be an effort to try and move beyond that, but at the same time, I think the WTO issue will have to be resolved.
You know, I want to talk about one of the big controversial issues, and it's an outstanding issue, and that is, of course, the nuclear deal. A lot of euphoria when it was inked by the previous government. And you write about it, and I like the way you've quoted it. You say it looks like the terrifying portrait of Dorian Gray. Do you believe that we are likely to see any breakthrough as far as the nuclear deal is concerned, given the fact that India is refusing to move on the liability issue, and perhaps India's concerns are not appreciated fully by the US either?
Certainly, that's one part of it. But I think at the same time, there's another part which is also written in the report of how the US has sort of backtracked on some of the commitments that they have made as well. So I think both sides really need to try and work this through and see how they might move forward. Now, one of the things about a pragmatic relationship, we heard this again from Ambassador Shankar as well, is actually not to try and push those areas where you know you're going to have disagreement.
Well, time for us to take a break, but when we return, we continue our conversation here on the CNBC TV 18 special.